Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols and welcome to another Make It Monday. Today we're going to do a project with watercoloring over embossed images. I've done quite a few projects using this technique lately and thought I would do a little video tutorial. So first off, we're going to stamp and emboss our images, and I'm using the In Bloom set. I'm going to be embossing in white, but you could emboss in whatever color you would like. So try clear, you could try a metallic. There's lots of things you could do. So I've stamped all over this paper. You can't see it because it's in the Versamark ink. We're going to go ahead and emboss it in the white. And I am going to actually have a little fun with this and speed it up. I don't normally emboss this fast, but working on some video editing techniques. So let's go ahead and emboss really quickly. Don't you wish that every project went that fast? So I'll go a little slower on this one because I'm just going to emboss a single blossom on a die cut. So first I'm stamping onto the die that I cut from fine linen cardstock with the In Bloom flower. Excuse my cat, she just sneezed. Covering it with white embossing powder. And using your heat tool to melt the embossing powder to emboss it. So get all of your stuff that you want embossed done, and then we'll go ahead and start the actual watercoloring part of it. So I'm using a water brush. This one is by Ranger. You can use just a plain old paintbrush with water. There are water brushes from other companies that you can use. I like them because you don't have to have a cup of water and it's easy to travel with. I'm using a fine linen reinker first because for this base part I want kind of just to more do like a tea dye or aged effect. So I'm going to start with the fine linen with the lighter. We're going to end up using fine linen and classic craft reinker, and I'm literally just painting the reinker over my embossed images, and I'm focusing on getting the edges so that it looks like the edges are aged on this one. That's my goal here. And you can see it's not like I'm doing any precise sort of watercoloring. I'm really just getting the color down onto the cardstock and painting it around. Now if you go right into the reinker, you're going to get a really saturated color. So when you're picking it up with a watercolor brush, make sure your brush is wet and maybe pulling, see how I'm pulling it off to the side. I'm putting it on a piece of acetate. You can use like if you have a plastic paint palette or something like that, that also works. Or a plastic bag. This is the Classic Craft. So I'm going to focus on more towards the edges with the Classic Craft. So I want the darker tones towards the edge, and then to kind of get lighter as it goes towards the middle. And again, I'm pulling that color kind of off to the side. I'm not taking it right from the center of that ink, because otherwise it'll be just probably a little too dark. And you want to have, I mean, with watercoloring you're going to have areas that just kind of splotch darker and splotch lighter, and that's part of the characteristic of watercolors. It kind of flows and kind of puddles as you're coloring with it. So here I kind of have my whole piece done. As this dries, it's going to lighten up quite a bit. So we're just going to set that aside and let that dry. You can use the heat tool to dry, but I've got other stuff to paint, so we're going to do that next. We're going to go ahead and paint the flower image. I'm using Raspberry Fizz first, and I'm just going to lay down a base color over the whole flower. And again, it's that magic of the Emboss Resist where you can just paint right over the images and you're going to get your embossed image just pop right through because it resists that ink. I'm not so concerned about staying within the lines either. This is just kind of a beautiful watercolored flower. There's no rules that say I have to stay in the lines here on this either. And remember, with watercolor, you don't want to work the paper too much. So if you're really rubbing with your brush or you're too much water, you're going to end up tearing up your paper. So just be aware of that while you're coloring. So I'm going to add some shadows with some Scarlet Jewel. And Scarlet Jewel's pretty dark, so you can see I'm kind of trying to work it down so it's not super dark getting it on there. And on flowers, it's wonderful to practice for shading because it's really hard to mess up a flower. And I'm focusing on the areas where the petals are kind of meeting each other, or the petals are meeting the center of the flower to add the shadow in. And just adding that next shade is just a beautiful, easy way to add just some really nice depth to your flower. So think about like colors that'll go together. Like I've got Raspberry Fizz and Scarlet Jewel. You might use spring moss and some ripe avocado for some greens. Like I said, before, I used the fine linen and classic craft. Aqua mist and ocean tides, maybe even some Hawaiian shores in there, depending on how you want to do. Here's just kind of an example. The one on the right does not have the shading in, and the one on the left does. And it really makes your image pop and adds just a huge amount of depth to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add the shadows, and at this point here everything is painted, and I'm just going to let everything dry. I'm going to go walk away from it. You can use a heat tool to speed it up, but let everything dry. Here are my elements that I'm going to use to put my final card together. I'm going to add a little scallop to the top and bottom of my background piece with the heart border die. I just love how you can just stick this little hearts peeking right from behind, and they make the perfect baby scallop on the top. After I've got that done, I'm just going to put that right down on my card front. And I'm just going right flat to the paper. If you're worried about warping too, attaching it firmly down is a good thing, or put it under a book or something to dry. Paper is easy to flatten out. So now I'm just kind of working with my layout. I know what elements I want to use on this card, but my first idea I had in my head isn't quite working. I wanted to kind of have the flowers coming out, or the little flag coming out from the flowers, and they're too wide. There's not enough room. So now I'm kind of playing with where on the card I want to put this to make it work. So I'm trying it on the bottom, but that's not totally working either. And so I flip it to the top. And actually this works beautifully because there's that nice space on the sentiment that just the flower tucks into just right. So this is going to be my layout right here. I got to trim this little flag, sentiment flag, so I'm using my thumbnail right on the edge where I want to trim it. Real technical. Went and trimmed it with my paper trimmer. And now I'm going to add the flowers with some little pop dot square things. My least favorite part, peeling these little squares off. And then put them right onto the card front. And there, my card is pretty much complete. I added a few more things to the final card you'll see here in just a second. I did go back and add some leaves and a few rhinestones at the top by the sentiment. So it's your turn now to make a creation with embossing and watercoloring. Go to Nicole's blog and get the details. Thanks for joining me today, everybody. Have a great week.